the United States put forward a proposal for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Ukraine unequivocally accepted, pending Russia's agreement to do the same.
The biggest fear of Zelensky are the elections. Elections when he and his sidekicks will have to answer for not keeping their promises about peace with Russia, not protecting the rights of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, respect for rights and freedoms in a country which he himself has turned into a concentration camp.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'd like to thank Undersecretary DiCarlo for her briefing and thank Director Doughton for her intervention. Colleagues, more than 3 months have passed since this Council adopted a resolution imploring a swift end to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Following that historic resolution, the United States has worked tirelessly with both sides, seeking a path to peace. We want an end to this war. As the first step on that path to peace, the United States put forward a proposal for an immediate, unconditional, and comprehensive ceasefire. Ukraine unequivocally accepted, pending Russia's agreement to do the same. Since then, we have been urging Russia to accept a ceasefire. Following President Trump's May 21 call with Russian President Putin, the Russian Federation is expected to provide a term sheet broadly outlining its vision for a ceasefire. We will judge Russia's seriousness towards ending the war not only by the contents of that term sheet, but more importantly, by Russia's actions. On that note, we condemn Russia's decision over the past weekend to launch some of the largest missiles and drone strikes against Ukraine since the beginning of the war. This disregard for human life does not demonstrate a desire for peace. It must cease. On the other hand, the recent agreement by both Russia and Ukraine to exchange 1,000 prisoners is an indication of what might be possible. If both Russia and Ukraine are truly interested in peace, the United States will work with both parties, with European partners, and with the United Nations to help achieve that goal, beginning with a meaningful ceasefire. But we will insist the discussion of peace by both sides must be undertaken in good faith. If Russia makes the wrong decision to continue this catastrophic war, the United States will have to consider stepping back from our negotiation efforts to end this conflict. To be clear, in doing so, we would not be abandoning our principles or our friends. Rather, we would be recognizing Russia's refusal to work with us toward a desirable outcome. As President Trump has made clear, we want to work with Russia, including on this peace initiative and an economic package. There is no military solution to this conflict. The deal on offer now is Russia's best possible outcome. President Putin should take the deal. The alternative, continuing to wage the war, would not be in anyone's interest, including Russia's. Doing so would continue to damage Russia's economy, military resources, national security, and international reputation. Additional sanctions on Russia are still on the table. President Trump has emphasized from the beginning that this war was a strategic mistake and should never have happened. Time is not on the side of anyone who would prolong it. We will call on both Russia and Ukraine to make the difficult, historic decision to pursue peace. The responsibility of ending this war ultimately lies with them. If one side proves unable or unwilling to do so, it will own the consequences. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, we'd like to once again state for the record that we completely disagree with the presidency's approach that is inviting delegations to today's meetings under Rules 37 and 39. Aside from Ukraine, there are 5 more delegations who have been invited. They're either NATO members or EU members or their allies. Every time these delegations spend at least half an hour of our precious time given the budget deficit at the UN, the very valuable time of the Security Council, so as to read out the same narratives with their zero added value. in addition to the representative of the EU. This situation is unacceptable, and responsibility for this falls squarely on the shoulders of the presidency. Without a doubt, the European nations, when they hold the presidencies of the Security Council, are simply impossible to place the impartiality of the Security Council above bloc solidarity. This undermines our credibility and the value of our discussions. However, we are counting on European delegations, especially the main sponsors pumping the Kiev regime full of weapons. We hope they will also ask to speak tomorrow at the briefing we requested on the theme of European attempts to thwart the peace process surrounding Ukraine. We have a lot of questions and we will be expecting answers. We aren't expecting answers, but we do harbor the hope that the EU will answer at least some of them. Not as part of a staged EU-NATO event organized by them for their purposes, based on preparations made by Brussels, but as called for here at the Security Council as part of an interactive discussion as the entire international community looks on. Strategic sovereignty was lost long ago by our former European partners, and they are incapable of doing what I just asked for. President, the script of today's meeting is absolutely clear and predictable. This meeting, much like previous similar initiatives undertaken by our Western and of late European colleagues specifically, these meetings are convened not to resolve problems nor to bring the Ukrainian crisis closer to a peaceable settlement. The goal is to stop an image of a supposedly free and democratic Ukraine from being definitively deflated. Ukraine, which has the image of a victim of a so-called Russian aggression, an image which the European sponsors of the regime in Kiev are trying to keep afloat. They've been doing this for years now. They began creating this image long before Russia launched its special military operation in Ukraine. It's becoming increasingly difficult for London, Paris, Berlin and their satellites to blow up this propaganda bubble, because the dictatorship in Kiev and the endeavors of the Kiev overstayer princeling to cling to power at any cost, power he would lose if peace were to prevail, are patently obvious. The biggest fear of Zelensky are the elections. Elections when he and his sidekicks will have to answer for not keeping their promises about peace with Russia, not protecting the rights of Russian-speaking Ukrainians, respect for rights and freedoms in a country which he himself has turned into a concentration camp and a meat grinder. Moreover, as long as the bugbear of a Russian threat exists, the Zelensky posse doesn't have to account for all of the money stolen from state coffers, nor the stealing of Western and, in particular, U.S. assistance, which amounts to tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. This isn't something Zelensky's European accomplices and the Biden administration want, those who have profited handsomely from the Ukrainian conflict. That's why the main objective of this group of militarists is to prevent the main shareholder, the U.S., from exiting the Ukraine anti-Russia geopolitical project. They want to prolong the war for as long as possible. This isn't easy, because the new U.S. administration has, over the last few months, opened its eyes and seen the true colors of the Zelensky regime, as well as the root causes of the Ukrainian conflict. That's why they're resorting to any and every provocation, any and all lies about Russia, its activities and plans. Today, once again, in this chamber, they're asking us to believe that Russia is knowingly shelling residential areas of Ukrainian cities, serving up as evidence the consequences of Ukrainian air defenses, which have been stationed next to homes and social infrastructure in violation of basic norms of international humanitarian law. At the same time, what's being hushed up is the fact that our strikes target exclusively facilities linked to Ukraine's military-industrial complex, and we are successfully destroying or rendering these facilities inoperable. Over the last few days, we've hit munitions storages and military technologies in the Dnipropetrovsk region, a temporary deployment site, and rocket and artillery munitions warehouses of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Mechanized Brigade in the Sumy area, as well as a temporary deployment site for foreign mercenaries in Svetogorsk, in the DPR, and in the Kharkov regions. A strike was conducted on a defense industry plant in Ukraine. That's the Pavlogradsky chemicals plant in the Dnipropetrovsk region. We destroyed 2 Patriot anti-aircraft missile system launchers. Rockets were fired on an unloading and storage area containing military equipment and munitions in Odessa port. This resulted in the destruction of roughly 100 containers containing important components for uncrewed vessels, UAVs, as well as munitions. What is also being hushed up is the fact that the Russian Federation is doing what I just mentioned only in response to massive and deliberate shelling on the part of the Kiev regime of peaceable Russian cities. Thus, despite the fact that the Russian Federation called a 72-hour ceasefire to mark the 80th anniversary of the victory over fascism, between the 8th and the 11th of May, we recorded over 14,000 violations, over 4,000 attacks by artillery, tanks and mortars, 62 attacks using MLRSs, 9,900 strikes and releases of munitions from UAVs. We recorded 5 attempts to break through Russia's state border in the Belgorodsk and Kursk regions, as well as 37 attacks waged by the Ukrainian armed forces. In those 3 days, an aggression was waged by Bandera's followers, which claimed the lives of 6 Russian civilians and at least 17 people were injured. It's very telling that the most massive attacks by UAVs on civilian objects in Russian cities, including Russia far removed from the front line, were waged by Kiev after we saw nascent progress towards peace. Specifically, they waged these attacks after direct Russo-Ukrainian talks in Istanbul were resumed and set a course towards an end to the conflict. Between 8 p.m. on the 20th of May and 8 a.m. on the 27th of May, what was destroyed and intercepted is 2,331 UAVs launched from Ukraine, including 1,465 which were outside the area where we're conducting this special military operation. Regrettably, as a result, there were civilian casualties, including women and children. On the 22nd of May, due to an attack on the village of Pantelimonovka in the Donetsk People's Republic, 8 people were wounded. On that very same day, in the Vasilyevsk municipality in the Zaporizhia region, owing to a UAV strike, a woman died. She was born in 1990. 4 children were wounded. The Ukrainian armed forces also struck civilian objects in the city of Lvov in the Kursk Oblast using HIMARS, and 16 people were wounded, including 2 children. President, the plans concocted by Zelensky and his accomplices are plain and clear. Their goal is to trick and to disorient President Trump, who is taking decisive steps towards peace. At any cost, they want to return the United States, which has lost hundreds of billions of dollars helping Ukraine, to return the U.S. to an anti-Russian and Russophobic course.
Subscribe to Oneindia and never miss an update.